Well, hello, my name is Andy Tidy and welcome back to another episode of Canal Hunter. This is Canal Hunter on the road. We've come up north of the border and we've come to explore the Union Canal. Strictly speaking, it's the Edinburgh and Glasgow Union Canal, but everyone just refers to it as the Union Canal. It stretches from Falkirk to Edinburgh, and as with all of these canals, it was built to carry coal. This canal was constructed and completed 200 years ago. This year is its double centenary. The construction of the Union Canal followed on from the success of the Forth and Clyde Canal, the canal which the Union Canal joins at Falkirk. The people of Edinburgh had seen the people of Glasgow benefiting from an easy source of Lanarkshire coal, and they really wanted some of the same. It was exacerbated by some severe winters in 1794 and 1793. This really set them looking for a canal link. The problem was they were spoiled for a choice of routes. They had 4 different ways that they could access the coalfield, and they just couldn't decide which one to pick. The trouble was, because they couldn't decide what route to build, they just kept doing nothing. This went on for 18 years, and in the end they had to call in the engineer Tom Telford to sort out which was the best route. It took them just 4 years to construct the 31 miles of canal and the 11 locks at Falkirk, which dropped this contour canal down to the level of the Forth and Clyde. Of course, like so many canals of this era, cost overruns were a given thing. They started off with an estimate of 235,000, and by the time the canal was built it had cost 400,000. But that wasn't enough. It was built, but it wasn't really fit for purpose. It took another £200,000, taking the bill to a whopping 600,000 before the thing was actually open and operational. And what you ended up with was a canal capable of taking boats which were 11 foot 3 inches wide and a depth of 4 feet. This was good, but nowhere near as good as the Forth and Clyde, which would take boats up to 19 foot 8 inches and a depth of 8 feet. The main aim of this canal was to reach the Lanarkshire coal. But an interesting byproduct was, in its early days, it had a booming passenger service. 5 boats a day left Glasgow and Edinburgh, switching between the two cities. However, of course, ultimately the railway opened. In this case, the railway opened in 1842, just 20 years after the canal had been built. And at a stroke, the opening of the railway killed passenger traffic. I suppose it was kind of inevitable that once the railway was built and the canal went into terminal decline, it fell into railway ownership. In fact, this process only took 7 years. So by 1849, this canal was owned by the local railway company. In a way, this was a canal which came to the scene too late. Sure, it took coal and local farm produce into the city. It took the effluent and the rubbish back out. But it was too late to ever really turn a profit. Possibly if they'd picked an earlier scheme and got in there at the beginning of the canal revolution, they could have had a successful enterprise. So the Edinburgh basins were closed in 1922. The Falkirk locks, which connected it into the Forth and Clyde, they were closed in 1933. And as an isolated canal, it kind of staggered on until 1965, when it was fully closed. From there on, I'm afraid things got much worse. Lots of improvement schemes on the outskirts of Edinburgh saw the bridges dropped and the canal filled in long sections. And there the story ended for many, many years. But fortunately for this canal, it had a dedicated bunch of enthusiasts who wanted to see it not only reopened but reconnected to the main canal. And linking into the same project which saw the Rochdale and the Huddersfield Narrow come back to fruition at about the millennium, so did the Union Canal. The long sections which had been buried were dug out, bridges were reinstated, as were the aqueducts, but probably most importantly, the Falkirk locks, which had been lost under a housing estate, were replaced by the Falkirk Tunnel and, of course, the mighty Falkirk Wheel, a structure which is a tourist attraction in its own right. So we've come up to Falkirk to explore this old canal. There's a group of 6 of us and we have hired a fat boat. I don't normally go for wide beams, but I suppose you want to know, how did I fare on the Union Canal? Well, I suppose the answer has to be slowly. The canal is still narrow in parts, it's weedy at the margins, and going can at times be slow. But it has to be said, the views to the north over the Firth of Forth are at times quite spectacular. Now, whilst the Falkirk Wheel is no doubt the dominant engineering structure on the Union Canal today, it's actually most famed for its 3 large aqueducts crossing the rivers Armand, Avon and Leith. Each one involves a massive aqueduct designed using the lessons learnt in the construction at Chirk and Ponkersoffty. They all include iron water troughs set into stone, and this permitted the construction of lightweight hollow piers and arches, so we end up with this trio of particularly fine aqueducts. The canal traverses a number of distinct zones as it travels east, initially running through the old coalfields and then breaking out into countryside with interesting towns and villages like Linlithgow and Ratho, enticing you to stop and explore. The early parts near Falkirk are dominated by coal mining, but then the middle section means you enter the old Lanarkshire shale oil industry, a venture which saw millions of tonnes of oil-saturated rock extracted from the earth, heated in retorts, and then oil was recovered. Up to 18 gallons of oil per tonne of rock. This was all long before liquid oil had been discovered, and the end result are the huge pink bings which dot the skyline. sterile waste material that's been left behind and which nature is struggling to reclaim. Sadly, whilst the canal did pass through the centre of the shale oil area, it played no part in its transportation. As the canal crosses the River Armand with its impressive outflow falling into the void, the Edinburgh Castle starts to emerge in the distance, and the nature of the waterway changes from rural to suburban. There's a long section through Wester Hales which has been dug out to minimalist proportions, and the narrow channels made for slow going with a wide beam boat. Within the city boundaries, the canal is well used, with many rowers, paddleboarders and canoeists sharing the space with a handful of boaters on the move. The well-maintained towpath is busy with walkers and cyclists, as you'd expect in a big city, and everybody seemed very pleased to see boats on their canal. Now, the original terminus of the Union Canal was in two basins near the castle, but these were filled in a century ago, and today, if you want to travel to the very end, you need to book a passage through the Lymington Lift Bridge. That said, there's only a few hundred yards beyond the bridge, and we found it simpler just to turn before the bridge and then view the last section during the 15-minute walk it took us to walk into the castle in the city centre. Now, the original plan had been ambitious, and it was to include the Forth and Clyde as far as Glasgow, but such were the charms of this little waterway, we decided to take our time on the return, and we explored Edinburgh, and then we took in the tranquillity of Ratho village and the contrasting bustle of Linlithgow and its interesting high street and equally impressive palace. Had we pressed on a little faster, we could have made a detour down to the Kelpies, but we visited them on the way in. Now, whilst the Scottish waterways are distant from those of England and Wales, the Union Canal is well worth considering as a holiday option. It's an easy canal, with all the changes in level being concentrated in the Falkirk end. And the lifts and the locks are all operated for you by Scottish Waterway staff. Perhaps the nicest thing about the waterway is its quietness. There are only a handful of boats available, and you can easily travel for a day and just see one or two on the move. Well, that's it for my exploration of the Union Canal. Sadly, we didn't get a chance to see the Falkirk, so that means we're going to have to go back sometime and take another look. But for now, cheerio, and I hope you enjoyed this video on one of the Scottish canals. Bye.